All right.
Klingschor, you're up.
Yeah, yeah. Shall I? I'll do the traditional intro, shall I? Um,
Please do, please do.
although I feel like you all know it already. I mean, but anyway, for
But
those
everybody is
for
waiting.
the
I mean, everybody's waiting to hear juxtaposition. They don't hear
it's
this word the
true.
whole week.
People need their fix of um,
Big words.
needless elite terminology, so let's get into it. The Gin Tonic Show is a weekly online call-in panel discussion show that focuses on the religion of Islam and related topics, in juxtaposition to the propaganda of Muslim apologists, the far right, conservative Christians. Thank you. And other parties of disinformance. The Gin Tonic Show aims to bring a balanced perspective to issues pertaining to Islam by presenting accurate information in order to educate its viewers on Islamic history, scripture, theology, politics, etc. Yeah, you know what? Let's go over to you first. I'll mention my announcements in a moment. Why don't you give? Do you want to do your definitions or have any news pieces before we get into anything substantial?
Yeah, well, let's do that, and then we'll just run through everything, and then we'll do all the changes. Or should we do the changes in the beginning? I don't even know. I don't know what's best. Okay. As Klingschor just mentioned, we are a show. In other words, we are not a scholarly, we are not a repository, we are not a, I don't know what to call it, an encyclopedia or anything like that. Okay, what I'm, for example, doing is I'm giving you my personal opinion based on what I know about Islam, based on what I know about the text, based on what I interpret from the interpretations after having analyzed them. Now, while I strive to be accurate, while I strive to be, as precise and as well text-based as I possibly can, there are mistakes that creep in. One mistake that I am not making is where I'm saying that Islam does have some incredibly bad ideas built into it. And what I'm saying is that there's a lot of people that are being influenced by these bad ideas. I mean, we're living in the 21st century. We have all these things available to us, every means of transportation, communication, information gathering. And I don't understand why people don't. I mean, I spend years learning about Islam. I spend years reading Quran, Hadith, and Tafsir, and all the commentaries, and all the old books. Doesn't matter whether it's Maududi or Ghazali or Ibn Rushd or whatever. And that's when I open my mouth. But I have Muslim apologists who don't even understand the basic meaning of atheist, and then they talk about atheists nonstop. So, this makes me a little bit pissed off. So this is what we're living today in an age where everything is possible, and then to come and superimpose 8th, 9th, 10th century morality and 8th, 9th, 10th culture on the 21st century, I think is a bad idea. So, and this is what I am saying. I'm not saying that everybody is. I'm not saying that everybody is illiterate who is a Muslim. But we have to face the facts that 50% are. So those are facts. We can't get around them. And we can't get around the fact what is happening today in the name of Islam. We can't get around that. Those are facts. Okay, and I think we should address them. I think we should talk about them. And we should analyze them. And that's what we're doing. So I'm looking at this from an atheist perspective. In other words, my personality is made up of 50 million different things. One of them is that I am an atheist. In other words, I am not looking at the world through the glasses of a theist who believes that there are gods or one god or whatever. I don't have that. But then on top of that, I have millions of other things which generate my specific position. I'm a skeptic. I'm a naturalist. I'm a whole lot of things with an ist or ism behind it. Now, atheists do not do that. All right, the atheist only has one single attribute, which is not believing in a god. What theists do. Like a vegetarian has only one piece of information. It's not believing in eating red meat, or a dragonist not believing that dragons exist. And that is it. So I'm looking at Islam, and I still maintain that Islam is a religion as well as a socio-economic political system. And I still believe it's an ideology, because otherwise the whole thing doesn't work. And if I look at the Quran, I see that it's also a political ideology and a worldview and a religion. and the religion is sitting in the middle, and influencing all the other pieces that belong to Islam. And this is, I mean, and yes, I mean, I'm still pissed off about last week that I let this go on for so long. This futile, useless discussion. I'm not saying that all Muslims are illiterate. I'm not. I'm not saying that all Muslims are terrorists. I'm not saying that all Muslims are being indoctrinated the same way by Islam. I'm not. I mean, how can anybody think so? For me, I actually said again and again and again, there is no such thing as Islam. And there is no such thing as the Muslim. They're all different. That's what I'm saying. There's 1.5 billion versions of Islam around, and that's the way that I feel. So, and this is why I think it's time that we talked about this and explained what Islam is from our perspective. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that it's the single most bestest and whatever version. It's just the opinion of a couple of guys. So, joining us, who's going to introduce himself and give us his view on what his ideas are and what he thinks we should be doing here. And this could be totally different from what Klingschor and from what I'm doing. So I think it's good to have different opinions and different. So anyway, here's Arash, and hello Arash, welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. And I hope that you're going to feel comfortable here and that you can contribute a little bit here.
Hi guys, I just wanted to say thanks for having me. Klingschor and Stop, and yeah, I totally agree with what you just said about pretty much everything. I don't want to get into the last week's comments and all about definitions and everything again, but I think that it is good to point out that not only are we just giving our opinions, we are talking in we could even say the humanities perspective, if you guys would agree. We're talking about political science, and they don't, like I said last week, we don't use the scientific method in political science. So it's okay to use words such as cause, and saying that we don't follow a scholarly method is almost giving credit to the argument of the other side, which you can say smoking causes cancer. That's totally okay because we're not talking physics, In such arguments, I think it's okay. And anyway, I would get past that, and I think it is a good idea because everyone was getting so annoyed in the comments the other time about us just continuing on this, and I think it is a really good idea to just get past things like this. Let's never get caught up again on such little things. Thank you.
Cool. I should probably mention at this point that I'm going to be taking a break from the Gin and Tonic Show for a while. I've been kind of, oh yes, sorry guys. Yeah, I've actually just been wanting a break for a couple of months now. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
And I see you're still quite ill, Stop.
Yeah, God has stricken me. I don't know, whoever invented viruses.
I wasn't sure if that was a laugh or a death croak. I had a moment of concern there for a second. So, God's stricken you?
Please.
God's stricken you. Oh yeah, so yeah, I should mention that yeah, I'm wanting to take a break for a while. And so, but I don't want you to think, I don't want the audience to think that there's some sort of, because I was told that some people think, or might think that there's some sort of bitterness because me and Stop disagreed. So I invite you to recall that we always disagree in most shows, so it's nothing, I think that's actually quite healthy that we have different perspectives. So that's, yeah, I don't want you to think that there's some sort of ill thought there. Not at all. So yeah, and hopefully Arash will be, I think, hopefully joining on a more permanent basis, which I think will be excellent to have an ex-Muslim or a Middle Eastern perspective on these kinds of issues.
Though I still think that we definitely need your side to keep us kind of sane, not too much far into
Well, we'll see. I'm not sure how. I need some time off from all the debates and the discussions. So, and I'm entering another semester now of increasingly intense uni. So it's yeah, I just need some time off. But I'll look around and see if I can find other people who would be good for the show. If anyone has any suggestions, because I think I've also been thinking for a while. Perhaps it'd be better if we had more people on here, because I think there was something to having a couple more people on here. Back when there was like the rationalizer and atheismo, there was just more diversity of opinion. I thought it was maybe more, I don't know, broader perspectives, etc., etc. More fun, perhaps. So, yeah, it's good to have more people coming on. Also, when me and Stop eventually die, it'll be good to have some fresh blood on here to keep the torch, passing it on through the generations. So
that went down fast. That went south real quick.
Well, you know, we can only evade the wrath of God for so long. Anyway, so that I just thought I should.
Little tearjerker.
Yeah. This is. I hope you all have a big anime tear right now. Yeah. Sorry, the Saudis aren't paying me enough for this, guys. So I'm have to find the vocation. You wait.
Make me laugh.
Your boss just died.
Well, is it the Saudis or will the mullahs in Iran? Will they pay more? I don't know. I should check it out.
Right now it's the Saudis comparing the oil prices. I think the mullahs are pretty occupied in Syria
that
and
was
Yemen right
something
now.
interesting, actually, that I wanted to touch on because I thought it was very interesting. Well, I'm repeating myself. But before we get into that, anyway, I was just being facetious, so whatever. So the topic of the day that me and Arash were talking about after the last show, in which we thought would be cool to just touch upon or retouch upon, is sort of the development of the concept of caliphate. Particularly, it's the decline of the importance of the office in the late Middle Ages.
Well, actually, Klingschor, I followed up on that. I thought, well, if you're going to keep that perspective, and you seem to know exactly what I was talking about last time with the Khadim al-Haramain. And
Asharifain.
Yeah, and so I thought that you were going to definitely fill that in. So I thought I'd go ahead and put in the next aspect of it that I wanted to focus on, which
brilliant. Yep.
Yeah, where that leads to and how that forms Shia and Sunni differences and how they view themselves and how Islam is to them politically, according to that book. Shia Revival. Yeah.
Yep, Vali Nasser, great book. Now, before we get started, though, I just thought I'd sort of touch upon what Stop touched upon before with Muslim apologists. And, I mean, my God, so to speak, is it... I'm trying to think of a really diplomatic way to put this. I'm trying to tone down my normal hysterical mode, so I'm trying to be more articulate, guys. So give me a moment to find the words. The crying response of religious apologists, well, not just religious, you find this in common with all ideologues who react to people criticizing their articulated ideology or things they hold dear. But my goodness, what a crock of shit have I had the joy to experience in response to the article. I recently wrote an article called The Quranic Milieu, Where Was the Quran Written?, where I sort of officially and coherently laid out the various points of evidence that would seem to indicate that the Quran originated in the context of northwestern Arabia, on the Levantine fringe of Arabia, in the modern-day Negev and Jordan sort of region. And some of the response has been really good, and I've had some academic feedback and criticism, and I really appreciate that, and I can see where every now and again you make a mistake or something needs to be tweaked, and I really appreciate that. What I don't appreciate is just the meaningless rhetoric. I mean, So
This
one
sounds kind of
commentator.
interesting. What are your points
One-
about this? I've never heard this. What are the?
Oh, well, I can touch upon them in a moment. I just want to quickly mention this to sort of confirm what Stop was saying about some of the ridiculous antics of apologists. So one commentator said, I don't have time for this guy's recycled 1970s to 90s stuff. Call me when he has a point. Number one, a complete failure to engage with any of my materials. But also, I don't understand. I mean, all scholarship is built upon prior scholarship. Like, it's so meaningless to just say, oh, this is from a time period where there was some skeptical activity. I just gonna ignore it. I mean, it's just a complete failure to actually interact with the evidence that I've adduced. I don't know, it's almost like an ad hominem or something, and this is certainly the case with another comment where someone saw that it was the works of Patricia Croner and just rejected it. And then when I probed, it turns out that Croner was wrong about something to do with the oldest Quran. So therefore, I guess my perspective is invalidated. Never mind the fact that this subject of the dating of the Quran is actually pretty much irrelevant to what I've talked about in the article. It's as though the people commentating have actually not even read the article. I mean, it's astonishing. How can you have all these strong opinions? These are like, some of these people are academics, actually, who are commenting, and there's nothing.
Yeah, but they're not opinions. They're preconceived ideas. This is the whole thing.
Well, it's just reactionary rhetoric, is what it is. And and when I question some of them, there's just nothing. It's just meaningless. It's just meaningless rhetoric. So I
think the difference
I
is
feel your pain.
you're trying to find some answer, and they already have the answer, and they're trying to defend their answer from your new answer. So I mean,
the thing is,
obviously they're always going to put up this wall.
Yeah, and the thing that I find quite annoying is people always say, you've started off with a preconceived notion, and it's just false in this case. I actually started off with the assumption. But number one, in general, when I was younger, I had the assumption that Muhammad was a prophet of God. Let's just be clear about that starting point, right? And then, with this particular argument, I actually started off with the assumption that this view was incorrect. That the Quran was not from Northwest Arabia, and it was through engaging with the evidence over a long period of time. Like, even at the time of Tom Holland coming onto the Gin and Tonic show a couple of years ago, when he articulated this argument, I rejected it at the time. Don't remember if I explicitly stated it on the show, but I remember thinking, this is too much to swallow. I don't see how this can be the case. But over time, as I engaged more and more with the evidence and I considered it, it seems to me reasonable that much of the evidence deduced in this argument is indicative of the Quran being from this milieu, from Northwestern Arabia. So it's just...
Do you think I can have like just 15 seconds just to do a quick summary?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think I need to explain there's three basic ways of looking at this. You can either say, okay, I accept the standard Muslim narrative that there was a guy, he was in a cave, and then an angel made of light came down and then repeated what his God had told him up in heaven, word for word, line for line, sentence for sentence. And this was then memorized and then repeated to the others, and then they got scribes and eventually wrote it down. So this is the standard narrative. Then you have people who say, well, hang on, this doesn't really make so much sense. For various reasons. I'm not going to go into the reasons now. And if you start doubting them, what you are left with is a Quran, and they say, well, we don't really know where the Quran comes from. So it arrived in Mecca, and Muhammad was in Mecca, so however you want to put this together, those are two different things. So they sort of take the sitting on the fence stance where they're saying, well, we don't really know where it came from, we just have to accept it. And then you have the third viewpoint, which says, well, if you look at the contents and if you look at reality, if you look at the reality which is proposed to us via agriculture, via archaeology, via geography, via history, via all those things, none of those narratives make sense. So we need to chuck everything out and start from scratch and start from following the evidence. So I was also somebody who thought Jesus existed. And then when I started doubting it, and then when I followed the evidence, I found out, no, it's just a character. So if you start chucking things out and starting from zero, and then you follow the evidence wherever it leads you without any preconceived ideas, then you arrive at a different story. And this is what we are doing. This is what I'm saying. This is why I want to bring up this quick summary that there are three ways of looking at it. It depends on what your involvement is, what your ideas are, what your level of evidence is, which one you accept.
The problem is, I'm sure I was going to ask Klingschor this, even in academic circles, Muslims don't accept non-Muslim views because I've heard many times where they just completely let go of anything else that comes out of a Western college done by anything that's from a non-Muslim scholar, because they say, okay, this guy's obviously too biased to answer this. And what you were just saying makes it so you have to be a non-Muslim in order to look at this from a neutral perspective, from a historical perspective, because no matter what you do, if you're a Muslim, you're gonna put this the first story in your head. So it's like they fight against.
You're right. It's some. See, when someone who's religious comes and looks at their religious text, often they bring basically a pre-conclusion to the table, which is that, blah, this is from God, blah 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 blah. I mean, it's Dungeons and Dragons scholarship. If we presuppose this ridiculous scenario, what adventures can we have with it? If we presuppose that magic exists, we're going to ignore all the scientific information that we have available to us. We ignore the failure of theism, its incoherence as a concept, blah blah blah, its unfalsifiability, given the way that God has been defined as all-powerful, etc., etc., right? And we'll just pre-conclude all this to be the case. Oh, what does it look like? Oh, well, in that case, we can somehow sort of reconcile parts of this evidence with this view. I mean, it's just post hoc, Whereas exactly to say, Stop, if we actually just look at this without all these pre-conclusions, these unwarranted, I should say, these unwarranted, untenable, incoherent conclusions, then what emerges is I think the kind of picture that I'm suggesting. Sorry, what did you say, Arash?
What is your put out your argument? I'm very interested, actually.
Oh, well, I guess the key point is, as I was saying, what does the text in and of itself suggest? Okay, and as a starting point, you can do this with Islamic tradition in mind, but I guess my starting point is, Quran is the earliest Muslim document really that we have. All the hadith and everything appear much, much later. So if we just look, and also, I mean, there's just been generation after generation of critical academia that's irrevocably undermined the historical reliability of the hadith and other related sources. Even neo-traditionalists like Motsky are pretty pessimistic about being able to reconstruct any kind of reliable, substantial biography of Muhammad, for example, right? So what's the picture? What emerges from the Quran? What emerges from the text as the environment it presupposes? Because every text usually reflects the author. It reflects the language and vocabulary and metaphors, of the person or the audience. It reflects the geographical and cultural allusions and environment, especially when the author is talking to the audience, as is the case of the Quran, which is modeled like a polemic, an interactive polemic, often. Right? It's even more clear because he's referring to the audience and to characteristics about them and to their surroundings in his various arguments. So we can actually build, with all these reference points, a sort of a picture of what the environment is like. And what do we find? We find a Judeo-Christian audience, or an audience immersed very deeply and profoundly in Judeo-Christian material, and particularly in Syriac influenced, Syro-Aramaic, Palestinian influenced, in fact, of the Syriac Arab audience, right? So again, we have this proximity to northwestern Arabia, to this region, in terms of the language, and also this fits with the Judeo-Christian audience because the northwestern Arabia was saturated with Christian and Jewish influences, and so were many regions. Yeah.
So you're saying that the Quran wasn't pretty much laid out by Muhammad in the southern part of the...
Oh, yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that this isn't reflected in the text. The text doesn't seem to give any real indication of being from the southern Hijaz.
I mean, what about the... I think one of the parts that really hit home for me is how it changes the way he talks before Hijra and after Hijra, you know. And
well, no, actually, there's a very... No, what the Muslims did was there was actually a lot of confusion and incoherence and disagreement about what's Meccan and what's Medinan, and this is actually the product of much, much, much later scholarship. I mean, there's no reason to grant these later theologies. You know, I mean, if we look at the text, the style is incoherent, right? Muslims attempted to sort this out into a progressive change of style, but I mean, it's post hoc analysis. It could very well be that what we actually have is different authors, different voices. And in any case, what I'm saying is not mutually exclusive with Muhammad being the author and going to Yathrib. What I'm contesting is that he went north to Yathrib, or what I would say is that he went south. From Makkah to Yathrib, from northwest Arabia, central Hijaz, which was a Jewish environment. There are no Christians. There's no substantial Christian environment. It was really superficial. Oh, a couple of his followers went to Abyssinia. Oh, a couple went here and there. It just completely fails to account for an audience that is deeply immersed within Judeo-Christian, especially Christian tradition. It just fails. That's not what you expect. Whereas the pagan influences are beyond superficial. I mean, there's barely a handful of verses that really deal with anything that's identifiably pagan and polytheistic. It's actually really surprising. I mean, the number of idols that are mentioned, minimal. They're almost completely omitted. Like what is it, like 5 or something? It's astonishing. This is not the traditional picture fractures and breaks when it comes to this. When it comes to this milieu. Sorry, what were you going to say?
But didn't Muhammad travel for most of his young life?
Yeah, but his audience didn't. His audience is supposed to be all the I mean, sure, a couple of merchants traveled, but he's talking to a general audience here.
See, the Muslims see it. Well, okay, when I was looking at this historically, it kind of made sense to me because the way I've read it is that the Jewish community had a lot to do with the commerce that was going on, and they actually
No, not at all. They were agriculturalists. They were fig growers.
I heard that there's a lot of Jewish communities on the west side of the Hijaz, all the way up to, you could say, to Sinai. Is that not true?
Yeah, but they were fig orchards, and they were supposed to be oasis or settlements.
Wait, so they're not...
I wasn't aware that there was... I mean, I'm sure there was some mercantile activity, but even then, it doesn't account for the Christian materials.
Because for me, I thought it makes sense for some young guy to go to some land. You know, obviously when he went to the Levant region, it was much more cosmopolitan than Southern Arabia. He saw maybe a better, he looked up to that new thing. He thought that the paganism was bad, and obviously, and he's just like, okay, I'm going to bring this back. So
look at it like this. Look at it like this. What if see the problem is that the audience, the style of the Quran is elusive. It's referential. It's presupposing that the audience are already intimately familiar with all these materials, with all these stories. Most of the time, they get brought up in reference, in passing, and remember the time with this and that and the other, right? So it'd be like me talking to I'm from Australia, right? It'd be like me talking to an audience and saying, that thing about that time when the Shah was ousted and blah blah blah. My audience is going to have no idea what I'm talking about, no idea. And yet what we're supposing with the Quran is that the audience is deeply immersed in the kind of materials that are being referred to offhand. right? That's the problem. So it's not like he's explaining all this stuff. Most of the time it's just assumed that this is common knowledge. This doesn't work with a pagan audience. This doesn't work with a Jewish audience to have all this Christian material. Very extensive Christian material, Christian interpretations of the Bible, right? Like the devil and all this kind of, Christian stories and lore. It just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, and I'm sure if we presuppose, Muhammad, this, that, and the other, you can it's possible if we twist it and have all this, maybe he did, and maybe he did just was talking all this rubbish and everyone was just really confused, but in the Quran it seems like the audience knows what he's talking about, but in reality everyone was just scratching their heads when he's talking as though the audience are intimately familiar. All right, we can imagine any kind of weird scenario for anything. Okay, and actually, whatever, any weird historical scenario that you like, right?
Can I just add something? Because the traders at the time, or just before that, were the Nabateans. I mean, they seized in, 5th, 6th century, and then the Arabs took their place. But I think in between the Jews...
The Nabateans were Arabs.
Sorry?
The Nabateans were Arabs.
No, but the civilization around Petra, when that died out, the Nabateans were a clan, were a group, were a tribe or something, and they disappeared. We still don't know why, but they disappeared. And then there was nobody to do this, nobody to do the trading the way that the Nabateans had done this. So this is why I think the Arabs then came in and took over the role, or the Arabs proper, or whatever I should say.
Well, the so-called Ghassanids, they weren't actually called Ghassanids, the Jaffnids is probably a better name, but whatever, were sort of a successor political power in that region. Anyway, the point is, if we don't presuppose all the theology and we actually look at this in and of itself as the earliest text and asking ourselves, what does the earliest text reflect? It reflects an audience, it presupposes an audience intimately familiar with Judeo-Christian materials and with a clear Levantine connection in terms of the language and the terminology, right? So Arthur Jeffrey says that the Aramaic-derived vocabulary and terminology within the Quran often, quote, approximate most closely to those found in the Christian Palestinian dialect, unquote. Right? So there seems to be a connection to northwestern Arabia, to Palestine, to this the borders of the Arabian Levantine nexus. Right? So that's the first sort of point.
But it also explains all the language.
Sure, most of the key terminology of the Quran is of non-Arabic origin, and especially Syriac and the Levantine. Well, I mean, Syriac is Syro-Aramaic. It's the Aramaic dialect from Syria, but I mean it had spread around, so that doesn't mean anything necessarily. But anyway, so the next point I make is the two seas. Quran talks about two seas, and I suggest that the two seas probably refers to the Red Sea and/or the Mediterranean Sea and/or the Dead Sea and/or the Sea of Galilee. I think that a combination of these four seas is the Bahrain mentioned in the Quran.
I have to agree with you.
I mean, this one's a bit more guesswork. This is not.
Yeah, but it makes sense if you look at the way. Yeah, and this is where Arash comes in again with the trading. Absolutely, then it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Now, but what's quite interesting though is that the Quran talks as though the audience are fishermen, right? So the Quran says its audience takes fish, lahm, tariyah, like fresh meat, and pearls from the two seas, which contains coral and is seen to be plied with ships, folk or jawari. So it's I mean that already. It's breaking the notion of the traditional picture of Mecca.
I mean, right? There's lots of pearl and like around Yemen.
Well, the Red Sea it has an ancient pearling industry and also coral reefs, and the Quran mentions coral reefs.
Yeah, I am really not versed in the history.
Marjan, coral.
Was it Marjan coral?
No, Marjan is the word used in the Quran, which means coral, according to
okay, cool.
the translations that I've seen, and I think Cassis. which is my usual go-to source for the definitions of Quranic terms. So yeah, even if the identity of the two seas remains shaky, I do think it's very fascinating to note that the audience of the Quran seem to be in part taken to be mariners, which is very contra the typical picture. Sorry, what are your thoughts?
We want to go to the caliphate thing?
Oh sure, I just you asked me what the evidence was.
Of course, yeah, that was interesting. That's
nothing. I've barely scratched. What I've touched upon is like the weakest evidence. Yeah, this is insubstantial. I mean, well, not insubstantial. I mean, it all adds up. But I think that these are not the strongest point of evidence. So, but that's all right. You know, if I've whetted your appetite to anyone listening, go to research-islam.blogspot.com, and you'll find this article. It's the latest article that I've put on there. So yeah.
Maybe you could type that in there because.
What in the comments section?
Exactly.
Oh sure. I'll go leave a link now. All right. So that's enough of that. Did you want to lead us into the caliphate? And
I was gonna say if I could give maybe a large picture of what I was hoping this argument could go into, but then you could start the history part. Okay, so I've been researching a lot into the different aspects of government that different Islamic communities like Shia and Sunni view themselves to be following. Like the Shia and Sunni see themselves differently. You can see that how they even resemble different ethnicities around the different countries. They're fighting within themselves every time there is a Shia and Sunni next to each other. They're fighting. Why is this? It's really interesting for me. And I found some connections to back when the caliphate started and how the caliphate started and how it ended up and how it was viewed by the Muslim community, by the Ummah, shaped, I think, how the Sunnis view themselves. And in the backdrop of all of this, there's this Shia community and how they view themselves in that time explains how they view themselves now, according to this book, actually. I mean, this book is very, the guy himself who's writing this is a Shia, so you have to take it with some salt. He is obviously pro-Shia in this. But it makes a lot of sense about how radicalism evolved and how radicalism, in a way, is actually a modern thing, which I'm not sure if I agree with completely, but I thought it would be a good thing to start in with a history aspect of how that whole caliphate thing started and what the meaning of the caliphate is to different people within the Ummah.
Is this where I come in?
Yeah, please.
It's quite interesting because people usually refer to the caliphate beginning with Abu Bakr, Umar, but this was probably not called caliphate. I don't believe there's any actual mention of a title or of the title contemporaneously employed by the early rulers of the expanding Arab polity. The early history is a bit vague and a bit confusing. The evidence we have for it, when we put aside later Muslim legend, is sometimes a bit lacking and a bit scarce. Although I do think there is some meaningful information preserved in contemporaneous inscriptions and texts and so on and so forth. I think it's with Muawiyah, actually, where we first have the mention of titles, or a clear title. And the title that Muawiyah adopted or proclaimed for himself was Amir al-Mu'minun, which is commander of the believers. Amir is like commander.
I think it's Amir al-Mu'minin.
Mu'minin, Mu'minun, it's the same word in slightly different contexts. I think the placing in the sentence or something like that. But and it's a standard. I always say un. So
I think they use Amir al-Mu'mineen a lot more than Un, because I've heard Amir al-Mu'mineen used by Sunnis and Shias, but I've not really seen.
I hear both interchangeably because it's the same word, just with a slightly different. I think it's a new nation. Anyway, I'll look into it. For now, I'm just going to say Un because that's the sort of the standardization I use to be consistent with every word of this kind. But it can also be said like the Mujahideen, Mujahidun. It's the same word, right? Just anyway. So I'm just going to say Un from now on, but be aware. So Amir al-Mu'minun, Mu'minun. Which is the plural of mu'min, which is believer. Amir, as I said, commander, so commander of the believers. Although it wasn't his only title.
This is interesting because Muawiyah is exactly the time where the Shia get emotionally split from the Sunni. So this is exactly how, because they call Ali Amir al-Mu'mineen or Amir al-Mu'minun.
I guess it's important to distinguish. What you're referring to there is how the Shiites, centuries later, imagined it to have gone centuries earlier.
Right.
I'm going off.
Are we talking about the Muawiyah of the Battle of, like, during...
Yes. But what I'm going off is the contemporaneous record from the time period itself. Whereas what you're bringing to the table is how Muslims perceive it to have happened in their later literary traditions, which is not necessarily the same thing.
Arash, did you already have Shias in those days?
Yes, there was like small communities, and they perceived themselves as Shias. You could kind of claim that there were Shias from right after Muhammad died. So technically, right from the time of Ali, you could technically say there were Shias, based on people who disagreed with the Sunni view of who should rule them.
But there was no Sunnis. Sunni is anachronistic. There were no Sunni texts in terms of like distinctive
Right. I'm saying
commentaries, hadith.
I guess
there was no distinction.
Traditionalists is what I should say.
No, I don't even think they were really detectable at this point. What you have is Shiat Ali, Shiat Uthman, and then you have the what are they called? Murji'ites, I think. Murji'ah or something like that. So you had most people held no opinion. Didn't go either way when the civil war broke out, and they said what matters is communal integrity. Whereas there were some people went and said Uthman was the rightful caliph and he should not have been killed or murdered, and some said yes, he should have been murdered and deposed. The ones who said yes, he should be murdered, where the Shiite end up becoming Shiite Ali. Ones who said he shouldn't have been end up becoming, the Umayyads, and also eventually would become the proto-Sunnis and then the Sunnis, in my opinion.
Right. That's exactly what I'm saying, though. The Sunnis were the ones that agreed with what happened.
No, because for Sunnis don't emerge until much, much later, and what the Sunnis adopt is actually a compromise position. Because they acknowledged that Ali was a rightful caliph, whereas this was not the view of the Shiite Uthman. This was not the position of the early you might say proto-Sunnis, exemplified by Az-Zubair and Talha, I think, because from there you get Ibn Az-Zubair, Urwa ibn Az-Zubair, who is the beginning of the traditionists of the Hadith and so on and so forth. They trace back to this guy. And then Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, who's the student to Urwa, and this is where the sort of Sunni hadith begins to come from, and this sort of traditionalism. And when you trace that back to, if you can, fill in sort of the blanks, I guess, the position of these Zubairis, you might say, was that they rebelled against Ali, right? Whereas later Sunnis actually said, Ali was righteous and he was a proper caliph. So over time, the views change. Another interesting one, which might surprise you, is that the early Shiites were not Ali specific. Early Shiites were actually there is some variation, and I guess there were some hardliners, but early Shiites held that the caliphate should be in the hands of Banu Hashim, of the family of Muhammad, right? And it's only later It's only later that it solidifies to Muhammad's semen is magical. And so it has to be through his daughter, and then from Fatima to Al-Hussein and Hassan. I mean, that view is later. That's subsequent. Because, I mean, you have, for example, one of the early Shiite rebellions of Al-Mukhtar in Kufa during the second fitna, which is in the 680s, I think, 683 perhaps. He brings to power one of Ali's sons, named Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, who was not the son of Fatima. So at this early point in time, it wasn't necessary for all Shiites that the bloodline go back to Muhammad. Right? So it was much more flexible, it was much more nebulous. You didn't have this sort of clearly defined, crystallized sects yet. Right? There was much more variation. And this lasts up until the Abbasid era.
Well, there was different Shiite. That's what I'm saying. Like, you could say technically Shiite started back then because you could call all of
in
these
a sense,
Shiite,
yes, yeah,
but
yeah.
But there was some that were Ali specific. There was some, like you said, that weren't Ali specific. There's ones that killed Ali. Like the Kharijites. Which,
right, exactly.
So but yeah, please continue with the
Muawiyah. Yeah. I'll try and keep this brief, and then we can get into the theology and how it's perceived, which is, I think, where you can come in substantially. So in addition to Amir al-Mu'minun, Muawiyah was also styled the servant of God, Abd Allah. That was his title. He was the servant of God and the commander of the believers. And he was actually, what's interesting is that he was this conferred upon him a theological function. Right? So he was actually able to sort of beseech God on behalf of the Mu'minun. So there's an inscription, an imperial inscription commemorating his building of a dam near Taif, which is in modern-day Saudi Arabia, in 678, and it says, in English translation, "O God, forgive the servant of God. O God, forgive the servant of God Muawiyah," so Abdullah Muawiyah, "the commander of the believers, Amir al-Mu'minun. Strengthen him and help him, and let the faithful profit by him." So the idea is that the believers, the community, the faithful, could benefit through this sort of intercession via the leader, right? So the leader actually has some sort of theological function here, some sort of intercessory function, it would seem. So it's almost as though Muawiyah, it seems evident that Muawiyah, within this early empire that's emerging, he kind of derived his politico-religious authority directly from God. There's already sort of indications of this at this point. Now, after the death of Muawiyah, there's a civil war, and there's all these many different parties. You have Al-Mukhtar, who I just mentioned, and the civil war goes from approximately, 680 to 692. It's hard to place exactly when it begins and ends, because, well, it begins at, does it begin with Muawiyah's death, or does it begin with people rejecting Yazid? It isn't clear. This stuff is approximate. But at the end of this conflict, which I think you could say ends in 692, which I think is when the Kharijite rebellions were put down, which is why I give that date, another Umayyad had taken control, and had taken control of the empire, and had systematically crushed his opponents. And the people who he crushed had also crushed other opponents, right? So at the end of the day, the Umayyads reigned supreme, and they imposed many new changes upon the Ummah, upon Muslims, including, in my opinion, changing the location of Mecca, which is what I touch upon in my other article, which is bringing them in together, but we won't talk about that this time. Now, what's significant about Abdul Malik, the ruler, this Umayyad prince, who sort of reunified the Arabs under a single ruler, is that he actually adopted a new title. He retained Amir al-Mu'minun, but he also styled himself as the representative of God on earth. Khalifat Allah fi ard. Or caliph. Khalifa. Caliph or caliph, however you want to pronounce it. The peculiarities of my pronunciation.
So this is Muawiyah, the first time that
No, Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik is the first to use the term caliph. Within the record, I mean, it's possible that it was used earlier, but we have no evidence of that. The earliest time it appears is with Abdul Malik. There's no evidence of the term before that, regardless of later Muslim tradition.
Right?
I mean, this is during the late 7th century, yeah, the 690s. Now, later Muslims didn't like this. Because what people don't realize is that initially the hardcore religionists, the hadith scholars, the theologians were actually in competition with the caliphate for authority, right? And so they actually, in subsequent centuries, they tried to downgrade the power of the caliph. They tried to deprive the caliphate, in their theory, in their theorizing, of religious authority. Which most people don't realize now, because people just think, oh, hardcore Muslims want to restore the caliphate. But originally there was actually, there was tension there, and there was rivalry. And so within the theory of the later Muslim scholars who romanticized the early generations and increasingly pushed back their theology and law and prescriptions to the early generations to give them legitimacy, they portrayed Abu Bakr as having been the first caliph, but he was the Khalifat Rasul Allah. He was the deputy or the representative of the Prophet of God, rather than the representative of God. See the difference? The representative of God, the Khalifat Allah, is far more powerful. He's God's man on earth, whereas the representative of the Prophet of God or the Messenger of God is obviously a far inferior title. You're just representing the Prophet, who was the representative of God, right? And then Umar was the Khalifat of the Khalifat Rasulullah, right? I'm not sure if I'm giving the correct Arabic, but he was supposed to be the representative of the Messenger of God, right? And then Uthman is the representative of the representative of the representative of the Messenger of God, right? So it completely changes the system. It completely changes the conception and the schema here. But this is the later theologizing of Muslim clerics in rivalry with the caliphate and its religious.
So when do you think that this view of how most Muslims accepted Shia and Sunni came in then?
The Abbasi era, the late Abbasi era, I think. So this is because there's something quite interesting here with the role of the caliph and his significance within the time of Abdul Malik and his successors, his Umayyad successors up until around 750, is that within Philo-Umayyad court poetry and imperial caliphal propaganda preserved in subsequent Arabic Islamic historiography, there are suggestions that the role of caliph was actually superseded all prior prophets and messengers, including Muhammad, in immediate importance and relevance. Because the prophets, they had merely relayed God's message to mankind. The caliphs, they were God's representatives on earth. They were divinely ordained to rule mankind on the behalf of God on earth.
Okay, but why do you guys think they didn't do this in Medina but in Damascus?
There's just no evidence.
Well, we are in Damascus. We know
we can only go off the evidence and what it suggests, and it's very hard to say what was going on in Medina, for example. Whereas we have inscriptions from the Damascene period, from Muawiyah onwards, we actually have some material that we can work with.
Why do you think this was?
It was because that's how you run the empire from Damascus. You can't run the empire from Mecca.
Well, yes, but in terms of why there isn't anything before that, it could be that there was nothing before that really, or what was before it was very inchoate and undeveloped, right? So it wouldn't have left a substantial impact. I think things were still very fluid back then.
Well, we know that the way that Mecca is perceived today came after Saladin.
Well, we're jumping ahead now. The importance of Hajj is. Let's get into that in a bit, because now I'll just quickly run through. So the Umayyads were overthrown from 743 to 750, there was, after a series of rebellions, Kharijites and Berbers, there was finally a successful rebellion, and a rival Arab dynasty took power. And these Arabs were the Abbasis. They were of the family of Abbas, Muhammad's uncle, Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas, the famous companion, is Muhammad's cousin, though sometimes I confuse the two, so sorry guys. And the Abbasis, like the Alawis, are a family. So the Abbasis are the children of Abbas and Ibn al-Abbas. The Alawis are the family of Ali via Fatima and whatever, Hussein and Hassan. And both of these families are part of the Hashim clan, which is part of the Quraysh tribe. So Muhammad was a member of the Hashim clan. Now, what's interesting, as I was mentioning before, is that up until this point, up until the early Abbasi era, Shiism was so broad that it actually included all of Clan Hashim. The idea was not that only the descendants of Ali, the direct descendants of Ali, should be the caliph, the imam, the leader, but that it should be anyone from Clan Hashim. But once the Abbasi family seized control, because they actually...
This must have been after the death of Ali, though.
Oh, we're talking
because
750, 760, whereas, you know...
Because the whole thing started on Ali, because you can't have Shiism without Ali.
Yes, but the actual in terms of the crystallization of the concept, that took a very long time. Because Ali, you could say, represented the interests of the Hashim clan, not just himself. And so the pro-Alis, the early Shiites, were, you might say, pro-Hashemites. And they only become crystallized into being specifically pro-Ali after the Abbasis seized control. And so I have a really interesting quote to read from the, what's it called? I think it's the Dhahab al-Muruj, or is it the Muruj al-Dhahab? The Muruj al-Dhahab of Mas'udi, who I think is a 10th century historian or chronicler. And yes, 10th century. And he records the following about the first real Abbasi caliph, Mansur. There was a Safa before him, but a Safa ruled for a very short period of time. The first substantial caliph of the new Abbasi dynasty, who really sort of set the tone of the new dynasty, of the new empire, the new administration, set the real substantial precedence, was Mansur. And he built Baghdad, made it the new capital, among other things. And Mas'udi records this about Mansur. He was the first to sow discord between the children of Abbas and the family of Abu Talib. So Abu Talib was the father of Ali. So it's the family of Ali and the family of Abbas and Ibn Abbas, who until then had made common cause. So up until this point, up until the Abbasi revolution, the Shiites were actually just pro-Hashemi. And it was only after the Abbasi revolution that they crystallized and split, and you had the emergence of these hardline Ali-only Shiites. This happened because the Abbasi family... Pardon?
I've never heard that they were only... I just thought that the way that I've been reading it is that they were pro-family of pretty much the bloodline of Muhammad, the way that you said that the sperm of Muhammad. That's pretty much which defines it.
This is. I mean, I'm sure there are precedents for this, but this position really solidifies subsequent to this, because it was when the Abbasi said, actually, this is not for Clan Hashim, this is just for the Abbasi family, and they actually ended up murdering, I think, if I recall correctly, murdering a lot of Shiites. I mean, Muhammad, like the Shiite descendants of Ali, and completely betraying them and crushing their subsequent rebellions, and actually, bringing about this discord between the family of Abbas and the family of Ali within Clan Hashim. Does that make sense?
Yeah. See, I just thought that the way that I've been interpreting it, because the way that he says it in his book, he says that the Shias pretty much broke off after every descendant of Ali. So one sect of Shias broke off right after Ali and didn't accept anything else after him. And then one sect broke off after Ali's son. And then one sect broke off after Hussein. One sect broke off after Hassan. Do you know what I'm saying? And then it led to pretty much the Twelvers. So the Twelvers were the last groups of Shias that actually were created. So you had the Zaydis and the Ismailis. So the Ismailis were much more prevalent than the Twelvers for the majority of this time. Right?
Well, the problem is distinguishing between what actually happened and what later Shiites romanticized about their past, which are two different things. So there can be some problems. So the early Shiites, according to Patricia Kroner and her research, the early Shiites actually weren't even anti-Abu Bakr or Umar. The original positions were either you held that Uthman should have been killed and that he had given up his right to be rightfully caliph, or that he had been rightfully caliph to the very end and should not have been killed.
Well, when do you think that this view that
in the time period I'm describing, during the late Umayyad era, early Abbasi era, this is when because it's subsequent to this that you actually see the emergence of the first Shiite sources.
But do you think that the Shias know this history or are fed something from
No, not at all, not at all. But I mean, look,
so we should consider what they're thinking in themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I'm suggesting that you should do now. I think that'd be instructive to see what do the Shiites themselves think about their history, because that's also important to get their perspective. And
I was waiting for you to get into after the 12th century and after how the caliphate.
Oh, okay. Sure. All right. Let me then.
So after Abbasid.
Yes. Okay. Give me a second. All right. Well, as the centuries passed, the power of the all right. As the centuries passed, the power of the caliphate collapsed. Very rapidly, actually, from the Abbasi era onwards. And you very quickly had the rise of lots of, at first, the governors of the provinces of Egypt and Khorasan and Ifriqiya and all these places were appointed by the caliph, by the authority in Baghdad. But as time went past, they gained more and more power and became more and more independent, and soon they retained the ability to elect themselves and then to be dynastic governors, governing dynasties, local provincial dynasties you might say, and until they basically became separate kingdoms. And most of them paid allegiance to the caliph in the same way perhaps that the European monarchs would pay allegiance to the Pope in theory, but in practice they did what they wanted to, and they invaded and so inside supposedly the caliphate you had wars and armies and invasions and conquests as the provincial governors, these basically independent kingdoms really, within you might say the Islamic Commonwealth, engaged in imperial expansion and aggression against each other. And at some point the Turks filtered down through the Middle East from Central Asia, first as mercenary slave armies, and then subsequently as the invading Seljuqi Turks, and then finally the Mongols invaded, and I think they trampled the last caliph to death.
But didn't you also have what we have today, that you have competing caliphs, that people say, well, I'm the one, what you see today?
Yes, absolutely. Not only was the caliph ignored often, well, almost always, and they just, these provincial governors did their own thing, but then you actually had the rise of rival caliphs in Spain, for example, and also in Egypt.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The Fatimids in Egypt, which was Shiite, Ismaili, and the fellow Sunni caliphs in Spain and North Africa, the exiled Umayyads. So it's very interesting. Now, I can't remember the exact date, unfortunately, of when the Mongols killed, or the year when they sacked Baghdad. So I apologize. Sometimes I forget, guys. As I said previously, I'm not Encyclopedia Britannica.
Wasn't that also 1253?
But I do my best. 12, maybe. I don't remember. Sorry. I mean, I can look it up on Wikipedia if you like.
Because I remember that in the West it was the death of Charles the Great, and then it was the
I think it was 1258.
1258 is when the siege happened.
Right.
Maybe that's it. Okay.
Is that? I think that's when he was killed. But I mean, I'm not 100%.
Yeah, he was trampled to death.
Because I don't think there's one single contributing factor to all this. I think this is also, again, one of these things where you have different small little incidents which all then bring together the whole big picture.
Sure, absolutely. And so what ended up happening is that following the Mongol destruction of the, by this time, symbolic caliphate, the significance and prestige of the Hajj increased substantially. So the caliphate declined, and the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, to the Hijaz, to the Al-Haramain, the holy sanctuaries, became the real focus point for Islam, or for Muslims, let's say. And so, thus, control over these holy cities also became important for rulers, because it became of propaganda, ideological importance, right? And so, by the time of the Crusades, the caliph is completely symbolic. I mean, even after the Mongols destroy the caliphate, you have some people try and preserve caliphs, and they'll, the Mamluks tried to keep a caliph around and say, yeah, this is the continuation of the Abbasids, but it was purely for show. It was purely symbolic. But when the caliph was completely weak, you had, during the time of the Crusades, other rulers who were not weak. So you had the Syro-Egyptian Sultan, Kurdish Sultan in fact, Salah ad-Din Yusuf bin Ayyub, Saladin. And he actually, the caliph was powerless, but Saladin, he was actually able to repel the Frankish incursion into the Levant, into the Holy Land, vis-a-vis the apathy of the powerless caliphate. And so this generates a rivalry between the Sultan, Saladin on the one hand, and the caliph on the other. And to sort of make himself more important, to bolster his rule, to bolster his position vis-a-vis the caliph, in his rivalry with the caliph, Saladin actually adopted the title Servitor of the Two Sanctuaries, Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, as the ruler of the Hijaz of Western Saudi Arabia.
Well, and with this, explain that the two sanctuaries, what they are.
Oh well, there's just the holy mosque, the holy Haram sanctuary in Mecca and Medina, which are held to be, these. Well, in Mecca, I think the Haram is where the Kaaba is located, where the black box is located there. Whereas you also have the special mosque of Muhammad in Medina.
Yeah, that's what the Haramain is. It's plural for two.
Yeah. Haramain is like Bahr is sea, Bahrain is the two seas. Haram is the sanctuary, Haramain is the two sanctuaries.
Yeah.
And you need to point out that the sanctuaries are not the holy cave and the holy grave.
Hey?
This is the tourist thing that they are selling. And a lot of Muslims actually think they are going to go and see the holy cave and the holy grave, the cave where Muhammad received everything and where Muhammad is located. Because a lot of Muslims don't understand their own, let's say, history, and they don't understand when they're talking about these two areas, they're not talking about the cave and the grave. Because a lot of people think that the holy grave is the reason why they're going to Medina.
Really? I've never encountered that
They're selling these tour packages where you get the whole tour and you get the whole tour guide and running around and talking about the cave and the grave. This is the big joke there. This is why there's so much outrage there, that they're saying that Saudi Arabia is just milking them for money.
Well, I haven't come across this, so I
and
guess
this
I can't
thing with
comment.
the swords, and that there's a piece of his beard and all this. They all have this.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, this is the folk religion. If what you're saying could well be true, because you do have this sort of, that most Muslims probably haven't read the Quran, not really familiar with the Hadith. They just follow what their local religious, the sheikh or the local imam or whatever tells them, which is usually often, bled with local indigenous customs and traditions as well. And people do sort of interact with these sort of more simple sort of tropes, like, pilgrimage to holy graves and holy sites. It's the practice and the customs, So I mean, and you do have, yes, the beard. I mean, I've seen the beard of Muhammad. Beard hair of Muhammad. I've been to Topkapi Palace, for example. The beard of Muhammad, the cloak of the staff of Moses, the cloak of Muhammad.
Exactly.
Of course, that's in Topkapi in Turkey, and we know how Turks are with history and.
Well, there's some controversy to do with something with the Armenians.
Some controversies having to do with some things Turkish.
And so.
But anyway, can I continue? Can I just say something about the Saladin thing? There was have you heard about that story about the lecture that I listened to that had this in it was online actually by.
Is this by Richard Boulier?
I think this is the same guy because when
it must be.
You pretty much knew exactly what I was saying, and how the story of how he pushes back the Franks and conquers Jerusalem, and then he is, like you said, he's the Sultan. There's the caliph in Baghdad as the non-power, but kind of like the Queen in England right now. Right, he's just sitting there, or like the Pope, almost. Just a theoretical. Is that what the word you used? You used a better word for it.
Symbolic.
Symbolic. I'm sorry. Words. And so he conquered Jerusalem, and then he claimed himself as the Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, and he actually started for the first time building things in Mecca and Medina. I'm not sure if Medina was it too around, but like pretty much places for people to stay. Apparently, until then, people didn't really. It was customary to go on the Hajj, but it wasn't like a huge thing where there's places for people to stay. They pretty much just camped on the outsides of this very tiny village, which was just a village at that point still. Even though Mecca was a big city, for its own thing, the way that, again, I'm kind of saying what this book is saying, Vali Nasser. He's saying that it was, or I'm sorry, not Vali Nasser. What was that guy again?
Richard, I think it's Richard Bouliet or Boulier.
I think so. Yeah.
I'm not sure how you pronounce the last name. It might be French, so I'm questioning.
Boulier. Richard Boulier, and he says that. So they have a fight, pretty much. It's competition, and the caliph and Saladin are camped outside of Mecca, and then they're trying to go in to do the whole thing, and then...
I'll clarify. There's a caravan from Syria, from Saladin's domain,
yes.
And there's a caravan from Iraq, from the caliph's domain. So they're almost representing, embodying this tension in the form of these two caravans who are both arrived at Mecca at the exact same time, and they both want to go in before the other. And there's this argument: who goes in? Who's more important? Is it the caliph's caravan or the sultan's caravan? That's kind of the situation. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, and this is exactly the point. At this point, the sultan has the power militarily, and because earlier apparently the messaging between these two guys, the caliph and Saladin, messages the caliph and says, dear caliph, great one, or caliph of the Rasulullah, I have conquered Mecca, or I have conquered Jerusalem with my army for you. And then he messages back and says, actually, it was my army because it's the Islamic army. So the caliph is telling the Sultan, Saladin, to, hey, back off, don't really claim this for yourself. This is the Ummah's army, which I'm the leader of. And then Saladin messages back and says, actually, no, it's my army. And I'm going to go and do the Hajj right now. And then so that's kind of why the tension started, you know. So but then all of a sudden both of them start going with huge caravans towards one from Mecca, or one from Jerusalem, one from Baghdad, and then they meet up, and then if you want to say so.
Yeah, a fight broke out between the two caravans. I'm not sure if Saladin, I don't think the Saladin and the Caliph were actually present when that fight broke out. But there was definitely a fight between the two caravans, which really exemplifies this tension and conflict. And you were right. Hitherto, there was really very little at Makkah. I mean, there was almost nothing. You know, it was a complete backwater. And probably the Hajj was actually probably uncommon at this point. It only really rises in popularity and urgency. Yeah, it was like a you know, oh, you meant to go on Hajj, but the real emphasis on the Hajj really comes from this time onwards.
Well, apparently the money that they used came as a tax, so whoever went there gave a tax, and from that tax they built the shrines.
The first real infrastructure I mean, there had been some building of previous dynasties, but the first substantial infrastructure, I think, was Saladin, which is some people might find quite surprising.
Right.
But even then, it was actually still relative to what it was later. It was nothing, right? Because then the Ottomans came and they built something there, which was significant. You know, so
what's significant about that is because after Saladin, this perception of what the leader of the Ummah is has a lot to do with what they do in Mecca and how they spend there, so to speak. Because after Saladin came in, he showed that power is with the army. So he came in, he actually got to go in first apparently, and he actually put himself as number one. So after that, the whole caliph thing completely disappeared, right? And like you said, they were trying to bring it back with. Well,
what's interesting is that it comes full circle, right? Because the Ayyubi dynasty, which is the dynasty of Saladin, it continues as being the sultans and the Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain. But then, when after they're succeeded by the Mamluki state, the Mamluks.
Actually, just to point Turkish... just to put in, Saladin is the guy who. This is the time where he changed the whole idea of using taxes to build up Mecca and using the Sultan or the Caliph to use his empire money to build up Mecca. So he kind of put this new responsibility onto the Sultan or Caliph.
Rulers. Yeah, but that the role of the Sultan was to maintain, well, the role of the Khadim, well, precisely, the role of the Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain is to build it up and to, yeah, exactly. And so when the Mamluks took over Egypt and Syria and the Hijaz, this region, basically took over the empire, and repelled the Mongols, the Mamlukis actually ended up adopting the title as well. Apparently, vis-a-vis when the Mongol rulers of Persia converted to Islam, the title of Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain was again assumed by the Mamluki sultans against their new religious rivals to the east. So you keep on having this east-west rivalry, this rivalry between Syria and or the Levant, Egypt, the Syro-Egypt in the west, and Iraq and Iran in the east. It seems to be this long-term rivalry between regions, and so the Mamluks also adopt this tradition, this custom that was started by Salah ad-Din, sorry. And this title conferred upon the Mamluki state, paramount status and legitimacy amongst, Sunni Muslims. It had tremendous propaganda value. Now it comes around full circle with the Ottomans.
See, this is exactly the point where a lot of I've heard this question of, they say, if this caliphate has to be from the tribe of the Muhammad, if it has to be from the Quraysh tribe, then how come and this is where it comes in. It's actually right after Saladin where this comes in, because Saladin was Kurdish. He wasn't even Arab. But this is where, in the mind of, okay, now I'm going to use the word Sunni, if you don't, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to use the word.
So from this point onwards, Sunni is appropriate now.
So from this point onwards, the power was the main thing that Sunnis looked to. So you could say, who has legitimacy? It's who has power and who controls this land and who can pretty much beat everyone else. And then after that, it in the minds of the Sunnis, it even came out of the maybe Quraysh tribe. That's why the Ottomans were able to control them as caliphs. That's why the Turks were able to control themselves caliphs. And this is also why lots of extremism in the Sunni side of the world arose. Like right after the sack of Baghdad, people came to themselves in the, I'm not actually sure what group it is. I have to tell you this. I should have been ready for this. But some group came up and says, this is ridiculous. Why should Baghdad or the caliph fall? So this shows that we're doing it wrong.
Ibn Taymiyyah. And then in sort of his neo-Hanbali
yes.
tradition.
And we have to now go back all the way. Is this the Hanbali?
The post Ibn Taymiyyah Hanbalis, I think, specifically, because at the time he was actually hated by Hanbali scholars, but he ended up setting the tone of the Hanabila henceforth.
So you could say that the
his thesis was that bid'ah had ruined the ummah, had ruined Muslims. Innovation, that there was too much corruption and polytheism had seeped in, and there was incorrect practice. That was what he claimed.
Bringing too much filth into the religion.
Yeah, we have to purge the ummah. We have to purge the community. What's interesting with these titles is that even though the Khadim and the Caliph start off as these rival titles, between Saladin in Syria, Egypt, and the Baghdadi Caliphate in Iraq, they end up coming together. So in 1517, the Ottoman Sultan Salim I, when he defeated the Mamluks of Egypt and acquired the Hijaz subsequently, he adopted the title Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, and he had already, or the state had already claimed the title of Caliphate previously, since the reign of Murad I. So Salim became the first, I think, dual role, Caliph and Servitor, Khalifa and Khadim. And so they actually ended up becoming unified in a single dynasty, in a single role. So
this is what dynasty?
The Ottomans. The Sultan, the Khadim, the Caliph was now the same person. And so this is quite an interesting development. And not even a Qurashi, like the Sunni hadith say, the Caliph has to be a Qurashi, and yet here we have these Turks. Although I'm sure I wonder if they had actually fabricated some kind of, lineage. I'd be curious to look into that and see what lineage they claimed. But yeah, so it's the end. It ended up, this power struggle ended up coming full circle, and the roles, the functions were unified in a single personage. Very interesting.
So stop. Do we have time for me to go into the how that kind of transforms?
Whatever you want. I mean, we have half an hour. We can choose whether we just stay like this or whether we invite other people in.
However you guys want to do it.
Well, what I should just mention that today the Saudis, I think, claim this title, Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain.
I think they've been claiming that for a long time, actually. I think I've heard that from the last king as well. Like they used to call it.
This has been going on since the early 1900s. They've been claiming this role, and it has tremendous propaganda value.
So they must have been doing it like as a symbolic thing for the new king, probably like, hey, you are now the Khadim.
Yeah, I believe so. Now, I actually want to mention Saudi Arabia and the oil thing that's going on recently, but do you have something more to add on this topic before I diverge?
Well, I had my whole thing about the.
All right, go. Yeah. Talk about that.
I can save it for next time if you don't want me to.
No. I mean, it's related.
Okay. Okay. I'm just gonna jump right into it then. So basically, if you have in mind, the thesis is basically saying the way that Muslims saw themselves, Sunnis and Shias, after the 12th century and 13th century, after this whole change of meaning of the caliph and Saladin, and how it became more of a power-based thing for the Sunnis, right? Like how we've been talking. So the Sunnis pretty much saw legitimacy and power and stability, and that's I don't know if you ever heard. There's like this Arabic saying which says 70 years of tyranny is better than 7 days of anarchy or something like that.
Yes. There's a very famous. I think it's a hadith. No. It's a legal maxim or something. Yeah, it's very famous and very.
Being a legal maximum means it's so connected with the religion because it's such a how legal.
Well, it's a common phrase or quote or concept, I think, within Islamic legal thought.
Right. Well, I guess it's more of a Sunni legal thought.
Right. Yeah.
Vali Nasser is explaining, and he's saying that that's how they saw legitimacy, and in a way. That's why all of a sudden ISIS is so popular, because it's so powerful. It doesn't matter what it does. The point is it's winning. The point is it's doing something that Al-Qaeda didn't, so now it's the more popular Al-Qaeda. It's the cool Al-Qaeda. Anyway, so okay, so if you think about how this is forming in the backdrop of how the Shias are forming in the backdrop of all this, they see themselves as like the Christians, how the Christians started out as being persecuted. The Shias are pretty much the way that Vali is saying have been seeing themselves as persecuted for as long as they remember themselves as. So they have the moral victory without the real power, which as the Sunnis have the real power and the moral victory as they think. So the Shias are more like Christians in this view, how they see themselves, and how. And this actually relates to how they see legal, like political law, and how this relates to the kind of government that they want. So, Sunnis would, let's see what is, apparently. Like what you said kind of changed this, because you said earlier in Shia they actually accepted Abu Bakr.
Originally, but this is most Shiites will not know this. Most modern day Shiites.
And that's why I thought. I mean, when did that come? When did they realize their own history, or have they always been?
No, I mean, there's probably a complete ignorance of this fact. But I mean, most Sunnis probably don't know that Sunnism only really becomes articulated in the late Abbasi era. I mean, even in the early Abbasi era, you still have this dichotomy between the people of opinion, so-called Ahl al-Ra'i, and the people of tradition, the Ahl al-Sunnah or the Ahl al-Hadith or whatever. So and it takes a long time for these Sunni legal schools to develop, and for all these Sunni legal texts to appear, and then for them to actually mutually recognize. This takes centuries. So I mean, Sunnis, and what Sunni knows this? None of them do. They all think, oh yes, Muhammad and the Sahaba were all Sunnis. This is extremely common, and this is universal. All religious people. Religion is a constant dialectic between, constant tension between the contemporaneous adherents of the religion and the founders. It's laughable for any religious person to think that they're actually following the original religion. So this is not just for Shiites. I mean, or even the original articulation of their self-identified sect. So this is not just a Shiite problem. This is the same as Sunnis.
Okay.
But what you're telling us is what Shiites, classical Shiites, thought about themselves. So just tell us that. That's fine.
Because Vali Nasser is a Shiite, so you know that this is coming from a Shiite.
You can. Yeah, exactly. You can. What you're articulating, and don't worry about what I said, because that's what is what happened in the actual time period. What we're looking at is how the classical Shiite tradition viewed itself. So that's
Yes.
you can articulate that. That's fine.
I think the differentiating factor is what happened or what is said to have happened then and how this is interpreted today and how it impacts the belief today. I think those are two different things.
Exactly, and I would even argue that when we talk about Islam, we tend to focus more, rightfully so, on today and the impact compared to what they hoped it would have been.
That is the whole difference. This depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to achieve the veracity of what happened in history? Are you trying to verify the accounts? Or are you trying to see how everything leads up to what we have today? So those are totally different approaches.
Right, I guess I'm taking the leading up to this approach.
Exactly. But you need to very clarify what it is that we're trying to do, because a lot of people are confused what the Gin and Tonic Show actually is, because sometimes we're talking only about history, and that's exactly it, because we're trying to establish what it is that we're talking about, and then sometimes we're
Even
talking
that
only
has-
about today, so it's a bit confusing for some.
Even history even has, disagreements we don't even know, which is...
Yeah, that is on top of it. Exactly, yeah.
So, anyway, where was I? So, apparently, the way that the Shias are looking at themselves, the Sunnis, or the Shias see themselves as a revolutionary force. Now, are we all familiar with the history or the story of Karbala?
Yes.
Should we-
I would assume no. If it just give it a side sentence.
Okay, so the Karbala story is the Shias are a minority who believe that the descendants of Prophet Muhammad who should be the rightful rulers, who at that time is Hussein and his son Hassan, and that lineage, which Hussein was alive at that point. Who else was alive? The real caliph that the main Ummah believed in, I guess you could say, I don't want to say Sunni, was Muawiyah, who we were talking about earlier. And at some point in every one of these Muhammad's lineage's lives, pretty much his grandson and Ali's son, and then his grandson and his grandson's son, they get killed by one of the other caliphs, because pretty much they're trying to claim legitimacy in front of the power, right? So the caliphs don't like these guys; they're ideological competitors. So they kill him off, and so the story of Karbala is this one famous one where Hussein and his family and a group of like 250 or something are stuck in the middle of the desert, and they're very thirsty, and Muawiyah has this very large army and has stopped the flow of, or doesn't let them drink water, so they're pretty much dying of thirst. And at some point, Hussein says, all right, we're just going to go in, and they all get massacred, women and children and all, and it's like this huge thing that defines lots of Shias, especially the Twelver Shias, which gives them the sense of martyrdom, and they have the moral ground, and we had the caliphate, except this fake imposter killed our, this is kind of like the Jews killing Jesus, kind of, almost.
Yeah, and apparently it wasn't only Muawiyah's people, but apparently he used some mercenaries as well, so there were some other tribes involved, which led to hatred between those tribes there.
Oh, I'm sure, because, if Muawiyah was the power in base, he must have had lots of allies. Pretty much everyone must have been against.
Yeah.
And so the story goes, so if you have that in the backdrop, they keep this, the Shias have that in their mind, so they see themselves as almost revolutionaries, right? So they see themselves as ideologues compared to the Sunnis, who see themselves as they have the power, they have to implicate it, and they're dealing with real-life issues. So according to Vali Nasser, Sunnis are more drawn to law because of the way they define themselves, because they read the Quran literally, so they read the Quran as the law, so it's right there. So it's very hard to get away from that. While the Sunnis are more drawn to rituals like things based on this whole Karbala story. So it's more based on saints and stories and myth compared to Sunni ideology which tries to stick more to the text and more to the legal basis of Islam's original sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I call it actually more ritualistic than legal.
Well, ritualistic was the way he defines the Shias, because when you look at the Shias, they're pretty much the whole thing right now, how Shias interpret themselves, is based on rituals. You know, how are you a Shia? You do these things. Like, you know, in Iran, for example, the majority of the people I know, maybe 90% of the people I know, would don't follow Islamic law. Like, they would drink, you know, they will watch anything that's, you know, bikinis or whatever. That's not a problem. They don't want to. They won't put a hijab on, but they still call themselves Shia. Why? Because they kind of accept the story of Hussein.
Identity, community, narratives.
And how is this identity achieved? Pretty much direct connect to the whole Karbala story and the whole ritual of being a moral high ground, but not having the power.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that Shias don't have this to the extent that Sunnis have this, because Sunnis, they follow all this mashallah, inshallah, they have more ritualistic behavior than Shias. Shias are more flexible. They say, for me, what is more important is that I believe that this God exists and that I'm a good guy, my intentions are there. So if on Ashura, I just maybe...
I think we're talking about different things, though. I agree with you in that the Shias, the Sunnis are more... The Shias are more flexible because they have imams to interpret, and I'll get into that real quick.
Exactly, this is what I'm... Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to get into that, but he's talking about something else and saying that the Sunnis, because they're so... they're almost...
No, they're more dogmatic, yeah.
Yeah, they're more dogmatic. And so while the Shias are more, like I said, it's maybe not the ritual is a bad word. What's the word I'm thinking of? Festivities, almost. It's about, like Catholic, it's about going and doing the works.
And they're also doing this thing that they are allowing themselves to combine prayers to get away with 3 a day.
I mean, that's true, too. You know, it's compromise. I think of it as compromise almost. But they say that Muhammad did that also. So, anyway, so where the story ends at this point, where are we? So, coming into the modern sense, okay? Really quickly, let me get into, we were talking about how the Mongols invaded. This is where he says that the original Sunni, we talked about how Sunni fundamentalism started, how they were looking at what's wrong, what's going on, we need to cleanse the Ummah. And around the 20s, we're going to jump way ahead. In the 1920s, this thing called the Jamaat Islamiyah started up. It was a response to colonialism. You know, it was almost at the same time where the Wahhabists Wahhabism was actually before this because Wahhabism was after this because what am I saying? Wahhabism was a response to Ottoman rule. So this was before the British colonialism. Jamaat Islamiyah was in the 20s. So Maududi, you know, from Pakistan, and is a part of this Jamaat Islamiyah. And the Muslim Brotherhood is one of the things that branches out of this Jamaat Islamiyah. Now, all of these are backlashes to losses in power. So the Wahhabists were a backlash to why are the Ottoman and the British here. The Maududi was thinking, what's wrong with the Islamic Ummah that we've suffered so much compared to the English? Because when he was looking at it, he just saw the fall of Pakistan and the split of Pakistan from India, and how the British, you know, he was looking at it from an Indian perspective of being a colony of Great Britain. So Maududi blamed Hinduization of Muslims in that area, and so he looked back at the origins. And then, so you see this fundamentalist view in Sunnism rising in the loss of power. That's my main point right here. Do you understand? Does that make sense? When they lose power, that's where they think they're going wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. While the Shias don't mind that, throughout most of their history, they don't have power, yet the religion continues on okay because that's not how they view themselves. Now,
well, I should mention that up until probably 1500, the Shiites were one of the main revolutionary groups, the groups most commonly rising against the authorities, rebelling, and trying to assert, and realize their sort of
idealistic view almost.
Well, yeah. I mean,
I kind of think of them as
reality,
the socialists of their time, even.
Well, I mean, they were monarchists. They wanted a specific. They would articulate their ideology with regards to a specific sort of messianic lineage.
I'm just saying that they were almost a rebellion for every caliphate. There was a Shiite guy who didn't like them.
And I do think that in practice, probably they would be this sort of known famous dissident ideology was a means for people dissatisfied to rebel and articulate their unhappiness with the system, sort of what you're referring to before with the Wahhabism. But what's interesting is that after 1500 and the Shah Ismail and the establishment of the Safavids, there is the dominant view within Shiite theology or theological thought was, and it may be gone back before that as well, I don't know exactly the date when this became dominant or normative, but the strong belief was that Shiites had to be politically quietist. They had to abstain from trying to seize political power because they had to wait until the Mahdi came. The Imam, exactly. And when he came back, then a true religious pure state could be established. Anything up until that point could not be a real, Islamic state, so to speak. It would just be the thing to do would be to put up with the monarch, and if it's a Shiite monarch, then that's ideal. But just put up with the monarchy and wait. That was the
political science interest people out there. For the political science interested people out there, Khomeini, when he came in, he kind of revolutionized this whole thing.
Yeah, reversed it. Right.
He reversed it.
Plato.
Yeah, he had a very Platonic view, exactly. And he brought in lots of Sunni fundamentalism and ideology. So he brought in that whole let's bring in an Islamic State, which was a much Sunni thing compared to a Shia thing at the time.
And also very, as we're saying, strong Platonic influences. I find this actually quite hilarious, especially given that apparently Plato was probably writing or composing, I don't know if he wrote it himself or whether or not it was orated, or what the actual situation is. But it was meant to be a satire, according to one view. But the idea,
you mean his philosophical king?
I think it's his republic, yeah. And the idea that the government should be the rule of the philosopher kings. These wise men who would rule the society on behalf of the stupid people who didn't know how to look after themselves. And these wise council of philosophers, or the philosopher kings, or philosopher king would know, because they're so smart and intelligent, they knew what the people wanted.
I actually thought that was his actual.
Well, I read somewhere that it's possible that this was actually satire. I don't know the exact, but whatever the case is, this is the model of free Iran. The Wilayat al-Faqih. Yeah. In Persian it becomes the V, Vilayat, yeah. Instead of Wilayat, because in some reason in Persian the W becomes the V. And instead of L it's E. So it's, what is it? Vilayat E.
Vilayat Faqih. E is like the E means of or something, or usually.
Yeah. And so this guardianship of the jurists, right?
Yeah.
This council of mullahs who and led by the ruling mullah, the philosopher king, the supreme leader, and this ruling council of philosophers, this elite, these mullahs. And it's basically the Platonic model.
Because you can see that he's fed off of Sunni ideology. And
Yeah, well, there's a lot of influences that come into play, I suppose. You know.
and this kind of goes back to why is it that every time they influence each other in such a fundamentalist way. They're trying to go back to the whole idea. You know, they're trying to go back to the Prophet's time. They're trying to go back to that thing that the thing that we sometimes say maybe isn't really Islam. But it seems that everyone's trying to get back there. Sometimes we like...
Well, see, people romanticize about the past and put authority in the past and increase.
But I feel like if everyone's doing it, that's... You know, we claim Islam is what people believe, not what we like to say. It's what their culture says and what they say they are. So maybe we should... You know, this is what they're saying they are. They're trying to get back to what they think is the good Islam, which is a history filled with blood, really.
Yeah, I guess it's like all romanticism. I mean, you know, so often conservatives, like in America, romanticize about the 1950s or about Reagan, right?
Yes.
Not forgetting the horror.
False romanticism.
You know, I mean, Reagan's economic policies, like deprivatization, just led to a succession worse and worse. Up
his
until
foreign
now,
policy, his
economic crash. I mean, the Contras. And you know, in Nicaragua and in Guatemala.
Of course, his foreign policy in America is very weird because it usually follows up from the last president. So lots of things that Reagan did was actually started by Nixon.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's true. It wasn't all him. But anyway, the point is, people romanticize about the past, irrespective of how bloody or brutal or horrible it was. People like to. It's nostalgia. People like to give it a shine and think it was better back then, and you know. So it's a very. I think it's very common.
Do you have more time? Stop, or I need maybe 10, 15 more minutes.
Oh, you go. I won't interrupt anyone.
I've got a quick question from the chat while we're on the topic. Could you
was it the assertion that I am a Jew? It's been a while since I've got.
You're a Jew being paid by Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Am I a fag or am I a Jew or am I now a secret Muslim? I never know what I am these days. You know.
Jehovah's Witness secretly. No.
Yeah.
Can you just quickly run just in a short paragraph? What was the relationship, the personal relationship between Sunnis and Shias over the last, let's say, 7 centuries? How did that work? Because I also believe that it wasn't such a big deal, and it's only being played out now. It used to be like horrific. It used to be military. Then they sort of agreed or sort of came to terms and coexisted. Then you had Iraqis and Iran. And then after the Ayatollahs came back, it was escalated once again. And today we have this outright hatred between the two in some areas. Can you just...
Yeah. What you said, well, that's it. That's it. What you said is absolutely correct. I mean, initially there was political conflict, and sometimes it was, very brutal. These wars and the Fatimids and the Abbasids and whatever, Shiites and Sunnis fighting each other and the Turks. But you also, generally, I think the history is probably pretty pacific. I mean, people just lived side by side. And so, in Iraq, before the American invasion, you had this Sunni and Shiite neighborhoods were intermingled, and it wasn't such an issue. But there was, as you say, the Iran-Iraq War, which you had the Sunnis fighting the Shiites, and often they would draw upon religious imagery and propaganda to substantiate that.
It's actually interesting because apparently, according to some of these, I've been looking into this, like I said recently a lot. They say that most of this really was nowhere to be found back then, but they don't say why it wasn't anywhere to be found. Not because that the ideology didn't exist. I think it's mostly because there was no news coming out of this whole region. I mean, the majority of this history, the Shias were such a small minority, they had to pay the jizya most of the time. So when the Safavids came, they were actually the first group to stop the Shias from paying the jizya. Do you know what I'm saying? In Iran, in Iranian history at least. So I think one of the reasons that they didn't have so much problem is because they were subdued most of the time. I'm sure that if there was a competition between power, they would have been fighting. But the reason that he comes in, it's actually related to what happens to. Maybe let me just continue a little bit. So the Iranian Revolution happens. Sunni fundamentalists look at Khomeini's successes. Like I said, they look to power as legitimacy. They look at his successes and they become revolutionary. And then the Afghan-Soviet war starts, right? So the Afghan-Soviet war starts. They are able to, quote-unquote, beat a superpower, a bunch of mujahideen, bunch of farmers armed with Islam, beat a huge superpower. And so after the 60s and 70s, they have this empowered feeling that, look, hey, we have the Iranian Revolution, we beat the Soviets. The Saudis are in the background funding Wahhabist ideology into Pakistan. Why they're doing this? This happened actually before the Soviet invasion. This is actually a result. So your answer of why they're killing so many Shias and Sunnis right now, according to this book, it's because of Khomeini's successes. So the Sunnis look at Khomeini and they say, okay, the Iranian Revolution is spreading this radical anti-Sunni, anti-establishment ideology, revolutionary ideology coded in Shiism, in radical Khomeini-ish Shiism. And they were really afraid of this. Where are the majority of Sunnis? There's a huge Sunni population in Pakistan. There's a huge Shia population in Pakistan. There's like 20% population in Pakistan. There's like 30% of population in Afghanistan. So the first place that Khomeini went to spread his revolution before he went even into Iraq, because Iraq was run by Saddam, he went into the east, into Pakistan. So one of the reasons that there was so much Wahhabist funding, Saudi funding into Pakistan was to go against this. So apparently the anti-Shia rhetoric, this ridiculous kill all Shias rhetoric, started from this kind of thing. It was after the Iranian Revolution where this huge anti-Shia versus Sunni thing started. Before that, they weren't really having a problem. And why did that happen? It was as a result, as a pushback against the Iranian Revolution's influence on Sunnis, pretty much.
Yeah, I think I'd substantially agree with that.
So does that answer your question, Stop, of the other?
That was not my question. It was from
It
does, yes. Well, I hope it does anyway.
I mean, I think this is all very interesting because this is actually very narrow view, though, because this is only looking at one way of this shaping. That one, he's very Shia, so this is obviously a very pro-Shia book, like I've said. The only hero, I don't know if you remember from this, Kling, the hero of this story was Ayatollah Sistani from...
yes, he's in Iraq.
He's in Iraq right now. I mean, he comes out as the one good guy. I mean, I actually know a little bit about Sistani. I like him compared to other... If you can say you like a...
Well, he represents the traditional Shiism, the quietism, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Well, to a greater extent than Khomeini. Well,
Khomeini's Shiism is just, it's just too much. It's violent. It's, at least that's a better...
It's a revolutionary ideology. It's revolutionary Shiism. It's red Shiism, really. That's what you could call it. As what I think is the term Vali Nasser uses.
What is it? You say direct Shiism?
Oh, no, a revolutionary Shiism. And I think Vali Nasser actually even uses the term red Shiism.
Well, yes, he does use the word red Shiism because of the whole Shariati influences and all that.
Yeah. Apparently, the Marxist concepts that were interwoven into the influences here.
Well, I actually didn't go into that, and that's very interesting as well too, because this whole thing happened during the huge communist expansion everywhere in the world. There were socialist movements going around everywhere. During the Cold War, right before the fall of the Soviet Union. And so in order to push back some of this very dangerous ideology that took the youths in, according to the Muslims, right? So the Muslims really hated communism because it was such a inviting ideology. It took everyone in.
Well, everywhere it spread. I mean, it was eroding traditional conservative religious customs and traditions, it was the main vehicle for secularism throughout the Muslim world, I think. And
that's one of the biggest fears they had, is because it was the vehicle of secularism. It was going to make everyone anti-religious.
And atheism. You can believe how often communists were killed or attacked for
Because they were
on the charge of atheism. Yeah, in
Yeah,
Sudan,
yeah,
the Communist Party disbanded. In Lebanon, they were mass killed, and on a couple of instances because they were atheists. And they were made. Where did they go? They were made to publicly renounce their atheism before they were all killed and dumped in the Mediterranean. So it's quite interesting.
But they used this, you know, they kill the communists, but they use their Marxist ideology because it's so effective. And right now, a lot of Khomeini's ideology, which comes, I can't say Khomeini's ideology, the Islamic Republic or the Islamic revolutionary ideology that came out after Khomeini, has lots of red in it because of the, you know. They love that stuff. It worked, so they incorporated it into their ideology. They made it all about the poor, and like I said, they're very revolutionary. The Shia is very, so it works right in, you know. The lower class became the poor Muslims versus the Americans. You know what I'm saying? It just works really well to fit in anything into that context.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of influences. Although I don't know if that's really characteristic of Marxism or socialism or communism. But there were definitely a lot of influences in the environment, sort of making up the environment that led to Khomeini's reinterpretation of Shia tradition.
Do you guys know about the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Khalq?
No.
I have heard of it. Yeah.
Just heard of, you know, I don't know that much about them, but I just think it's very interesting how they can be communist and very religious, and how they were able to just.
There are some examples of that. There are some examples of syncretic left-wing movements. So Libya is a notable example of that. You know, Gaddafi's Green Book. He had sort of tried to synthesize Islam and socialism.
Socialism, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean that the Gaddafi's movement was a post-Arab nationalist movement. So lots of Arab nationalism or Arab secularism nationalism was very socialist leaning too. You know, so that has a lot of.
Arab nationalism. I mean, Nasserism was called Arab socialism.
No. Exactly.
Okay, guys. Arash, can you sort of finalize your thoughts? Come make a conclusion.
I think. I mean, I'm done with all my things. I was just saying that, according to this one book that I read, which pretty is good an explanation, gives us a, you know, Shias are more revolutionary, maybe more. Actually, we didn't really get into the whole Ayatollahs and how their malleable interpretation. Maybe we can get into that next time. But just how the caliphate changes and how mostly Sunnis view themselves and how they see legitimacy and power compared to maybe Shias who don't see that.
Yeah, because it's true. We hardly spend time on Shias. We usually talk about Sunnis because they're the majority. True. So it might be interesting to give it a bit of a twirl to look at the other side.
I mean, just because if we're going to look into modern politics, you're going to have to take them into influence. Just because looking at
because it's there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right then. What about you, Kling? Any closing remarks?
No, I'll see you all around at some point.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you're going to pop in. I mean, come on, you're going to be curious. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, I'll try and pop in.
What would you?
I totally forgot.
What would you like to see? Like, if you were to give it like 3 months rest, what would you like to see to have happened and being addressed in the meantime?
I don't know. Whatever you guys find interesting, I suppose. I mean, it's not up to me.
Yes, that's a cop out. I thought you'd
I wish. Okay, I can tell you what. I wish we focused more on history, because I think we often get into politics where we have this strong disagreement, and I think maybe I think we've neglected the history discussions and scripture discussions and exploring this kind of stuff, which is why I found today very.
Come on, I think those hermeneutics on eschatology, on all these different topics.
Hey, you asked me my opinion. Okay, it's my opinion.
Okay, yeah, I should shut up.
We don't like your opinion.
Okay.
Clean.
all right, sorry. Anyway, that's.
But I agree with you, Kling. Though I think that we do cover lots of history, but I think that it's really important to cover how that reflects now, because that's what's affecting us. You know, there's lots of, like today, just today you said that according to this scholar, this, and how you had, you know, all of that, I have none of that research in me. And that goes, some of that went against what I had believed, but I can't say anything because I have no research in that. But in politics, it's like people can follow current events. And, you know, it's almost easier to debate, but then again, I agree that it's very, people disagree a lot also.
Well, and understand the origins. Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, listen, Alasai is not here. I mean, he said he was going to go on holiday. I can't remember whether he's snow skiing in Nepal or water skiing on the Maldives or whatever. But Heretic posted a very, very interesting story. Now, I don't know whether this is true. This is just a news story. And I find this interesting because there's so much information and there's so much background in this that somebody said that a family in Iraq now, living in the area where Daesh is, you know, well, what you call this, killing, oppressing, or whatever, ruling, governing, running, whatever you want to call it, they cook on gas stoves. Okay, so the mother says to him, well, can you? The gas is now nearly empty. Can you go and buy a new canister? So off he goes. He takes $7, what, you know, or the equivalent in real. And this is what it normally costs. And he goes to the shop and he finds, no. It's no longer the equivalent of $7. It's now suddenly the equivalent of $70. Because Daesh are good at moving weapons and ammunition around, but they don't have the logistics in place for the everyday items that people need. So he says, no, I'm not going to pay $70. They're fucking mad. So he goes back home and he says, no, we need to look at something else. This is crazy. Maybe I'll go get it somewhere else. Maybe I'll just drive a bit and then come back. And then they realize, well, they can't because they're a little bit cut off. And then they realize, well, we have to go and buy this anyway. So he says, well, instead of not cooking, let me go back to the shop and you know, like where I was yesterday, and buy this thing for 70, or the equivalent of $70. And he says, no, now the price was 100, because there's a scarcity, and the capitalist principle works. If you have scarce resources, the price goes up, and this is exactly what is happening. So Daesh is not the what would you call the socialist or whatever, the benign ruling body. No, they're just there to rip people off, and this is what a lot of people are seeing now. And this ties in with, I don't know if you've seen the news, that a lot of people are so disillusioned when they come to Iraq or they come to Syria and they need to do the dishes, and instead of going and fighting and killing the kuffar. And then on the other hand, you have a guy saying, well, I came there to help, but they're sending me to fight, but I don't know how to fight. I can do the dishes. So this is a bit of a chaotic situation there. So anyway, this is in lieu of a thing of Hadith of the Week. So is that it? Oh, we have a big.
I thought you were going to say the Hadith of the Week. That was instead of the Hadith of the Week.
That was.
All right, play us out with your Inception horn.
With what?
Old times, say. Your Inception horn.
No. I first need to. I need to quickly say what we're going to do is we're going to move the entire show to a more, because look, for the last how many years, we've now been running 2 years, I think, trying to be Middle East Asia friendly using this time slot. We've been discussing for ages whether we should move it to be more US friendly, where apparently more people are sitting that are interested in this kind of
US and Europe, hopefully. I wish we would have said this earlier in the show.
Yeah. So we're going to be moving it to 6 p.m. 1800 UTC. So I hope this is going to be more convenient for people. Should we do this like from when? Should we make it next, or should we make the next one normal just to run some advertisements for this and announcements and then do it, or should we start from next week?
I'm okay with running next week normal if you want, because I think that at least we should post another short video, just like a 1-minute video saying, hey guys, this is changing.
I'll prepare that, and then you can also put this on, because I'll then mirror this on my personal channel, and you can mirror it on your personal channel, and then we'll just run the announcement there. You know, because for you it's the middle of the night, so I feel a bit sorry for you. So, all right, the next show we're still going to be normal, and then the one following that, after we have the announcements, we're going to move it to 6 o'clock UTC PM.
Sounds good.
All right, so that's all for today. Thank you very much, Klingschor. We'll see you around. Have fun, and then see you next week, same time, same place, same everything. Bye.
Bye.